It began like any other quiet evening. A small town, wrapped in its routine calm, unaware that within hours, everything would change forever. No one could have imagined that behind one family's warm smiles and polite greetings, a dark storm was brewing. One that would soon shatter the peace of an entire community and grip the world in disbelief. This is the story of a murder so heartbreaking, so senseless, that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend it. The victim was a young woman named Elena Rivers, 26 years old, kind-hearted, and full of dreams. She worked as a graphic designer, loved reading mystery novels, and had recently moved into a new apartment to start fresh after a tough breakup. Her friends described her as someone who could light up a room just by walking in, but on one cold winter night, that light was brutally extinguished. At first, no one noticed she was missing. She often worked late and sometimes stayed over at her best friend's place. But when Elena didn't show up for work for 2 days, her manager called her phone. No answer. Her family tried calling too, only to be sent straight to voicemail. Something wasn't right. When police entered her apartment, they were met with an eerie silence. Everything looked normal, until they reached the living room. There, they found signs of a struggle, a broken vase, a chair knocked over, and on the floor, a single earring, bent out of shape. But there was no sign of Elena. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Detectives immediately launched a missing person investigation. They combed through security footage, interviewed neighbors, and analyzed phone records. That's when they discovered something chilling. The night she disappeared, Elena's phone last pinged near an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, an area known for being deserted after dark. Officers rushed to the location, hoping she might still be alive. Inside the warehouse, under the flickering light of a police flashlight, they found her. Elena's body was hidden behind a stack of old crates. Her life stolen in a moment of unthinkable violence. The entire town fell into shock. News of the murder spread quickly, and within hours headlines were everywhere. Young woman found dead in abandoned warehouse, community devastated. Investigators knew they had to move fast. There were no witnesses, no cameras nearby, and no clear motive. But one detail stood out. Elena's phone and purse were missing. It looked like a robbery, until the autopsy revealed something darker. She hadn't just been attacked. She'd been targeted. Whoever did this knew her, and the brutality of the crime suggested it was personal. Detective Laura Hayes, who led the investigation, described it as one of the most haunting cases of her career. It wasn't random, she said later. This was rage. This was betrayal. As detectives dug into Elena's life, they uncovered a tangled web of secrets. Her recent breakup with her ex-boyfriend Daniel Cole had been more complicated than anyone realized. Friends recalled how controlling he had become toward the end of their relationship. He constantly checked her messages, questioned her every move, and showed up unannounced at her workplace. Elena had blocked his number and moved to a new apartment partly to get away from him. But as investigators soon found out, Daniel wasn't ready to let go. Police brought him in for questioning. He appeared calm, almost rehearsed, claiming he hadn't seen Elena in weeks. But inconsistencies began to appear. Security footage from a convenience store near Elena's apartment showed a man resembling Daniel buying duct tape and gloves. Just 2 days before she vanished. Forensics later matched fibers from the tape found at the warehouse to the brand Daniel had purchased. Still, Daniel denied everything. He insisted it was coincidence, saying the items were for a home repair project. Detectives weren't convinced. They obtained a warrant to search his car, and there, under the seat, they found Elena's missing phone, wiped clean, but not well enough. Data recovery specialists managed to retrieve deleted messages. The last text Elena ever sent read, "Please, Daniel, leave me alone." The evidence was overwhelming. Police arrested Daniel Cole and charged him with first-degree murder. The trial that followed captivated millions. People from all over the world watched as the courtroom drama unfolded, struggling to understand how someone could destroy a life they once claimed to love. Prosecutors painted a chilling picture of obsession and control. They revealed that Daniel had tracked Elena's location through a hidden app on her phone, followed her the night she disappeared, and confronted her when she refused to reconcile. The confrontation turned violent, and in his rage Daniel ended her life. Throughout the trial, Daniel sat stone-faced, rarely showing emotion. When the verdict was read, guilty, he simply lowered his head. Elena's family wept in silence, clutching each other as justice was finally served. But for them, no sentence could ever replace the daughter, sister and friend they had lost. The story spread beyond borders, shared by millions online. People were moved not only by the tragedy, but by the haunting truth it revealed. How love, when twisted by obsession, can turn into something unrecognizable, something deadly. In the months that followed, the town where Elena lived changed forever. Candlelight vigils were held in her memory. Strangers left flowers outside her apartment building. Her former colleagues created a scholarship in her name for young women in creative arts, ensuring her passion would live on, even though she could not. But despite the conviction, questions remained. Why didn't anyone see the warning signs sooner? Could someone have intervened? Could Elena's life have been saved? Her case became a symbol, a wake-up call about the silent dangers of control, manipulation, and the red flags people often dismiss in relationships until it's too late. Even now, years later, those who knew her say they can still hear her laughter echoing in their memories. A reminder that behind every headline, every tragic story, there's a real person who deserved so much more than the fate they received. Months turned into years, but the memory of Elena Rivers never faded. Her face, once known only to a small circle of friends and colleagues, became a symbol of resilience and remembrance. The story of her life and death spread far beyond the borders of her hometown, sparking conversations around the world about the hidden faces of abuse, the dangers of obsession, and the quiet suffering too many endure in silence. News networks revisited the case again and again, each time uncovering another layer of tragedy. One documentary called it a portrait of love gone wrong. Another described it as a mirror held up to society's blind spots. For those who followed the case closely, Elena's story was more than a crime. It was a reminder of how easily danger can hide behind a familiar smile. Detective Laura Hayes, who had since retired, gave one final interview years after the trial. She spoke softly, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. "You never forget a case like this," she said. "It teaches you that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like people you used to know." Her words echoed the sentiment shared by millions who had followed the investigation. People who saw in Elena's story a reflection of their own fears, their own vulnerability. In the wake of the tragedy, Elena's family started a foundation in her name, focusing on emotional awareness, mental health support, and safety education. They turned their grief into purpose, determined to make sure no one else would suffer the same fate. Her mother once said in a public statement, "We cannot change what happened, but we can change what happens next." It was a message that resonated deeply with everyone who heard it. Meanwhile, Daniel Cole remained in prison, serving a life sentence without parole. Reports described him as withdrawn, rarely speaking to other inmates. Some said he spent most of his time reading or staring out of the window, lost in thoughts only he could understand. For many, that was justice. For others, it was simply the inevitable end of a path fueled by control, anger, and regret. But for Elena's loved ones, true closure never came. Every photograph, every memory, was a painful reminder of the laughter they'd never hear again, the milestones she'd never reach, and the future she'd never live to see. Grief doesn't fade, it changes shape. Some days it's quiet, other days it's overwhelming, but it's always there. Years after the murder, a journalist visited Elena's old apartment building to film a follow-up segment. The walls had been repainted, the rooms rented to new tenants, and yet, people in the neighborhood still spoke of her as if she had just been there yesterday. She was the kind of person who made you feel seen, one neighbor recalled. "It's strange. Even though she's gone, it feels like her presence never really left." That sense of lingering memory became the emotional thread that tied the story together. Across social media, people from around the world shared posts, messages, and letters addressed to Elena, strangers who felt connected to her story. Some shared their own experiences of leaving toxic relationships, saying her story gave them the courage to walk away. Others admitted they hadn't realized how dangerous certain behaviors could be until they saw how they unfolded in her case. In a strange way, her death had saved lives by teaching others to recognize the warning signs she never got the chance to escape. True crime enthusiasts, psychologists, and advocates all analyzed the case, trying to understand what drives a person to commit such acts. Experts agreed. Obsession, when left unchecked, can evolve into something destructive. It begins subtly, with possessiveness disguised as love, with jealousy framed as care, and then slowly grows into control, isolation, and, in rare but tragic cases, violence. Elena's story became a case study in universities, a reminder of how thin the line can be between affection and obsession. In one of her recovered journal entries, Elena had written a simple but powerful line, "I just want peace." Those 3 words would later appear engraved on her memorial plaque, a message not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever felt trapped, unheard, or unsafe. The plaque stands today in the town's central park, surrounded by flowers, candles, and photographs left by people who never even knew her but who felt her story deeply in their hearts. Years later, filmmakers released a documentary titled The Heartbreaking Murder that shocked the world. It opened with Elena's smiling photographs, her laughter echoing faintly in the background, and the haunting line, "She never knew her story would change so many lives." The documentary reached millions of viewers, bringing new awareness to the importance of early warning signs and community vigilance. It wasn't just a recounting of a crime. It was a promise that her memory would not fade into the background noise of forgotten tragedies. In the final moments of the film, Detective Hayes was asked what justice really meant in cases like this. She paused for a long moment before answering. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about remembrance. It's about making sure the world learns something from the pain. That's how we truly honor the victims. We make sure they're never just another headline. That sentiment echoed through every word, every interview, every candlelight vigil held in her memory. The story of Elena Rivers became a warning, a lesson, and a legacy. People began to talk more openly about emotional safety, boundaries, and the importance of support systems. It reminded the world that tragedy often begins quietly, in moments that seem harmless, in situations people dismiss until it's too late. To this day, her case remains one of the most widely discussed modern tragedies, not because of its brutality, but because of its humanity. It wasn't about fame, fortune, or mystery. It was about a young woman who deserved to live, to laugh, to grow old surrounded by love and peace. Her life was stolen, but her story lives on. And as the world moves forward, her name continues to be spoken, not with fear or anger, but with compassion and determination. For every person who feels unseen, for every soul that finds courage to step away from darkness, Elena's story stands as a silent guide, proof that even in heartbreak, there can be light. So tonight, as you listen to this story, remember her. Remember that behind every crime headline lies a human being whose only wish was to live freely and safely. Remember that change begins with awareness, and awareness begins with stories like this, because sometimes the most powerful legacy a person can leave is not in what they said or did, but in how their story continues to protect others long after they're gone. This is not just the story of a murder. It's the story of love, loss, and the enduring power of remembrance. It's the story of Elena Rivers, the young woman whose tragic end shook the world, but whose legacy continues to inspire hope, courage, and the fight for safety everywhere.